The scanner beeped 3 times, paused, then displayed a message that made Security Chief Quarl's crystalline facial planes refract light in patterns of profound distress. Species undefined, origin unverified, threat assessment error. Dean Vresh folded his third and fourth arms in what passed for administrative patience among his people. Run it again. Quarl waved a faceted appendage over the scanner. Same result. The device was 4,000 years old, manufactured by the archivists of Kelm who had catalogued every known biological form in the galaxy. It had never encountered something it couldn't classify. The source of this crisis sat in a waiting room chair, filling out paperwork with a primitive stylus. She had asked for paper after the digital interface rejected her biometric signature 6 times. Candidate 47J, Vresh read, squinting at the file. Entrance examination scores in the 97th percentile. Recommendation letters from the Exoanthropological Observation Unit. Do we have an Exoanthropological Observation Unit? Quarl asked flatly. Through the transparent aluminum partition, they watched the human tapping her stylus against her chin. She had been waiting 20 minutes, breathing oxygen like it wasn't a mildly corrosive substance. There's a flag on her application, Quarl said, his voice dropping to a frequency that meant genuine worry. Authorization code with a founder's seal. Vresh's secondary heart skipped. Founder's seals were reserved for individuals whose rejection might spark interstellar incidents, royal heirs, trade federation representatives, political leverage. She's from a planet called Earth, Vresh attempted the pronunciation. Unaffiliated, no Galactic Council representation. They sent us exactly one application. He paused, and someone gave it a founder's seal. They stared at each other in the way administrators stare when bureaucratic nightmares approach. The human looked up, made eye contact through the partition, and smiled. It revealed an unsettling number of bone-white grinding implements arranged like a predator's teeth. I'm going in, Vresh announced. That's not protocol. Protocol stopped applying when the scanner had an existential crisis. The waiting room smelled wrong, not bad, but chemically improbable. The human stood, extending one manipulator appendage in what his database identified as a primitive trust gesture. Dean Vresh, he said carefully, not taking the offered hand. There's been confusion regarding your admission. Is there a problem with my paperwork? She withdrew her hand without offense. I filled out everything except the carapace molting schedule section. Her voice was pleasant, mid-range frequency, communicating entirely through vibrating air molecules like an organic radio transmission. The scanner can't identify your species, Vresh said. I'm human from Earth. She glanced at the device. I minored in xenobiology, exobiology from our perspective. Do you want me to explain human biology? That won't be necessary. Vresh pulled up a holographic display. Your application was flagged with a founder's seal. Do you know who authorized this? She blinked twice, an unnecessary biological function related to ocular lubrication. I just applied through normal channels, filled out forms, submitted test scores, wrote an essay about interstellar diplomatic theory. She paused. The essay was pretty good. Someone very important wanted you admitted. That's flattering, but I don't know anyone important. She smiled again. I'm just a graduate student who wanted to study at the best academy in the galaxy. Quarl's voice crackled through Vresh's auditory implant. Dean, I'm pulling her entrance examination records. You need to see this. Vresh excused himself. Quarl had displayed the human's test results in 3 dimensions: logic problems, ethical scenarios, spatial reasoning, cultural sensitivity assessments. Look at question 47, Quarl said. The classic dilemma. A ship with 10 passengers, failing life support, only enough oxygen for 5. The correct answer was to apply the Preservation Priority Index, a mathematical formula accounting for species rarity and reproductive potential. The human had written, "This question assumes scarcity is inevitable. Fix the life support." Below that, she had shown engineering calculations for 3 different methods of recycling carbon dioxide, including something called photosynthetic algae her species cultivated for exactly this purpose. She didn't answer the question, Vresh said slowly. No, Quarl agreed, she rewrote it. They looked back through the partition. The human had returned to her paperwork, humming something that might have been music. What do we do? Vresh straightened all 4 arms. Process her admission, put her in temporary housing, find out who authorized this before it becomes a bigger problem. She might be the problem. Then we deal with it by regulations. She passed the examination. She has proper authorization. Until we have grounds for dismissal, she's a student. The scanner beeped again, still displaying, undefined. Vresh didn't answer. He watched the human draw a small illustration in her paperwork's margin, a simple sketch of Earth with continental outlines, carefully labeled. Like she was establishing a record, like she knew this was just the beginning. Professor Thelen had been teaching comparative biology for 3 centuries. In that time, he had analyzed specimens from 642 different worlds. He prided himself on never losing composure during faculty meetings. He was losing his composure. Their cardiovascular system operates on a closed-loop pump mechanism, he said, vocal membranes vibrating at a pitch indicating severe academic distress. Single-direction flow, 4 chambers, it's absurdly inefficient. That's your concern, Professor Ilix rotated 2 eye stalks toward him. I'm more worried about their neural architecture. They have exactly 1 brain, not a distributed network. 1 centralized processing unit. If it gets damaged, everything stops. Everything stops when damaged, someone muttered from the back. Not like this. They have a specific region dedicated to language production. 1 region gets destroyed, they lose the ability to speak, but can still understand words. Their cognition is geographically divided like some biological filing system organized while drunk. Dean Vresh stood at the conference table head, trying to maintain order while his faculty descended into collective academic hysteria. Can we focus on whether this student poses any danger? He interjected. Dr. Sinith, the astrophysicist, laughed, a sound like grinding tectonic plates. Her species split the atom before achieving interstellar travel. Do you understand how deranged that sequence is? That's like inventing antimatter weapons before discovering the wheel. They did invent antimatter weapons, Thelen added helpfully. Also chemical weapons, biological warfare, something called nuclear winter scenarios. They poisoned their own planet. Ilix's eye stalks coiled in revulsion. It's still habitable, which raises questions about their environmental resilience that frankly terrify me. Vresh massaged his primary temple ridge. Are we certain she can attend classes here biologically? She'll be fine, Thelen said dismissively. Humans are horrifyingly adaptable. Their homeworld has climate zones ranging from frozen wastelands to natural ovens. They live in all of them voluntarily. I'm more concerned about other students, Quarl interjected from his door position. We've had 3 incidents already. What kind of incidents? First, candidate 47J went to the cafeteria. She ordered something called coffee, which the synthesizers interpreted as mildly toxic alkaloid extract. She drank it deliberately, then requested a second cup. The faculty absorbed this in silence. Second incident involved a Trell Collective student attempting standard greeting, reading emotional baseline. He had to be escorted to medical, kept saying her emotional spectrum was too loud. Professor Ilix leaned forward. What did he sense? According to his statement, joy, curiosity, anxiety, determination, nostalgia, excitement, and controlled violence, all simultaneously. He said it was like listening to 12 conversations at once. Humans don't have emotional regulation, someone asked. They regulate, Thelen said, pulling up a biological scan. That's what's disturbing. This is their brain activity during a relaxed state. See these regions: active threat assessment, social performance monitoring, impulse suppression. They're constantly managing competing drives. Their entire psychology is structured around internal conflict. That sounds exhausting. It is. They even have disorders when regulation systems fail. Depression, anxiety, intrusive thoughts where their own minds generate scenarios they don't want to think about. Why would evolution create that? No idea. Evolution is apparently chaos on that planet. Vresh felt a headache forming in his secondary neural cluster. You mentioned a third incident. Quarl's crystalline surface flickered with embarrassment. She asked a maintenance drone for directions using verbal communication. The drone's language processor crashed trying to parse her syntax because human linguistic structure violates fundamental principles of information theory. How do they communicate with each other? Contextual inference, tonal variation, facial microexpressions, body language. They have 23 distinct muscles dedicated solely to conveying emotional subtext through facial expressions. Dr. Sineth raised a speculative appendage. I reviewed her entrance examination essay. It's genuinely insightful. She proposed a framework for understanding diplomatic failures based on differential time perception between species. The math is sound. The theoretical basis is original. Sineth paused. She also made 3 references to something called human history as cautionary examples. I looked them up. How bad? Over 40 major wars in the last 2 centuries alone. Not border skirmishes, total mobilization conflicts involving millions of casualties. And they still organized a space program. I don't understand how they're not extinct. Pack bonding, Illich said suddenly. Everyone turned. I've been reading their cultural studies. Humans form social attachments to almost anything. Each other, obviously, but also domestic animals, inanimate objects, abstract concepts, fictional characters. They'll adopt creatures from entirely different species and treat them as family. That's rather sweet. It would be, except their pack bonding instinct is directly linked to their aggression response. They don't just love things. They become violently protective of them. There are documented cases of humans fighting predators 3 times their size because the predator threatened their pet. What's a pet? An animal they keep for companionship. They befriend their food sources. No, pets are different from food animals. They have categories. The room fell silent. So, Vresh said slowly, we have a student from a death world whose species regularly poisons themselves for recreation, experiences contradictory emotions simultaneously, communicates through a system so contextual it breaks translation software, and forms emotional bonds with random objects. That's the summary. And someone thought she should study diplomacy here. Vresh pulled up administrative records. The AI that processed her application was decommissioned 4 months ago. Why? Erratic behavior. Started flagging unusual candidates, claimed it was identifying high potential variables for systemic innovation. He highlighted a code line. Its last act before shutdown was approving Earth's application and assigning founders seal authorization. An AI gave her diplomatic clearance. Not exactly. The authorization code itself is authentic. Whoever issued this seal had legitimate authority. Professor Thelen's membranes went still. You're saying someone important wanted this human here and used a malfunctioning AI to obscure the paper trail. I'm saying we need to figure out who, before this becomes larger than it already is. A soft chime interrupted. Quarl checked his security feed, then looked up with an expression somehow conveying existential dread. What now? The human just joined a study group. 3 Trell students invited her to their quantum theory session. He paused. She brought snacks. Are they eating them? Voluntarily, she called it cultural exchange. Are the snacks poisonous? Probably. Everything from that planet seems poisonous. Monitor the situation. If anyone requires medical attention, intervene immediately. The meeting dissolved into smaller arguments. Vresh remained at the table, staring at candidate 47J's genetic scan rotating on the central display. Somewhere on campus, a human was making friends and sharing toxic food, completely unaware that the galaxy's foremost academic institution was having a collective crisis about her existence. The scanner still read, undefined. Maybe, Vresh thought tiredly, that was the point. The observation deck overlooked a simulation chamber the size of a small moon. Professor Krell adjusted 6 monitoring screens simultaneously, her reputation as the Institute's most demanding instructor well-earned over 400 years. Standard first contact protocol examination, she announced to assembled faculty. We've simulated the Jarvix, aggressive territorial species, non-verbal communication, history of violent responses to perceived threats. Vresh watched through reinforced viewing panels as candidate 47J entered below. She wore standard environmental gear, carried no weapons per examination rules, and had spent 20 minutes reviewing the scenario briefing with genuine enthusiasm rather than appropriate dread. What's the success rate? He asked. 43% achieve peaceful contact, 32% manage strategic withdrawal without casualties, 25% fail catastrophically and must be extracted when the simulation tries to kill them. Krell's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. Excellent assessment tool. How do students typically succeed? Telepathic species establish mental rapport. Chemical communicators use pheromone diplomacy. Technological specialists deploy translation matrices. The Jarvix respond to dominance displays and territory negotiation, so understanding their socio-biological framework is critical. Below, the simulation activated. Holographic terrain materialized, rocky outcroppings, harsh lighting, hostile atmospheric conditions. Then the Jarvix appeared, 8 feet of scaled muscle, 4 arms ending in natural weapons, sensory organs tracking heat signatures across multiple spectrums. The human stood perfectly still. She's not moving, Dr. Sineth observed. Is she frozen? Threat assessment, Ilix said quietly, eye stalks focused on biometric readouts. Her heart rate just dropped. Respiratory pattern slowed. She's deliberately calming her physiological responses. Why would she? The Jarvix roared, a sound designed to trigger primal fear across species barriers. It charged forward, closing distance in seconds, stopping mere feet from the human with claws extended. Candidate 47J sat down. Just sat cross-legged on the ground, reducing her profile, eliminating vertical threat posture. She kept hands visible, palms up, and tilted her head to one side, exposing her neck. Submission display, Krell suggested uncertainly. No, Ilix breathed. Watch the Jarvix. The simulated creature had stopped its aggressive posture. Its sensory organs rotated, scanning the human from multiple angles. It circled her slowly, confused by behavior that didn't match any programmed response pattern. Then the human did something unprecedented. She started making sounds, rhythmic, repetitive, modulated tones the translation software couldn't parse because they weren't language. The Jarvix tilted its primary head structure, clearly listening. What is she doing? Vresh demanded. Thelen pulled up audio analysis. It's music. No semantic content, just patterned vibrations. Humans use this for emotional communication and social bonding. She's singing at it. Apparently. The Jarvix sat down. The observation deck went silent. "That's not possible," Krell said flatly. "The Jarviks are programmed to respond to dominance hierarchies, territorial markers, or submissive retreat, not whatever this is." But the simulation continued. The human maintained her seated position, continuing melodic sounds. The Jarviks remained sitting, aggressive posture completely dissolved. After 3 minutes, it made a low, rumbling vocalization, the simulation's version of non-hostile acknowledgement. Candidate 47J slowly reached into her supply pack. Every faculty member tensed. She withdrew a ration bar, broke it in half, and placed one piece on the ground between herself and the Jarviks. Then she ate the other half, deliberately slow, maintaining eye contact. "She's establishing social eating," Ilix whispered, "demonstrating the food is safe, creating shared experience." The Jarviks picked up the ration bar, analyzed it with chemosensory organs, and consumed it. Peaceful contact achieved. Scenario complete. Krell terminated the simulation, mandibles clicking in arrhythmic patterns suggesting profound academic confusion. "Someone bring her up here, now." 5 minutes later, Candidate 47J stood in the observation deck, slightly sweaty from environmental conditions but otherwise unbothered. "Did I pass?" "Explain your methodology," Krell demanded. "Oh, sure. The briefing said the Jarviks were territorial and aggressive, but also described complex social structures, which implied group dynamics and communication beyond just violence. So I figured aggression was probably threat assessment behavior, not a default state." "That's a significant logical leap." "Not really. Most aggressive species in nature, at least on Earth, use threat displays to avoid actual combat because fighting is metabolically expensive and risks injury. So I removed myself as a threat vector by reducing my profile and exposing vulnerability." "The singing?" Sineth asked, fascinated. "Nonverbal tonal communication. Humans use it for emotional signaling even when we have language. I figured if the Jarviks communicate nonverbally, they might be sensitive to auditory emotional cues. Singing is universally non-threatening in human cultures, associated with contentment and social bonding. Worth testing." "And the food sharing?" "Cross-species universal. Sharing resources signals cooperation. Eating together establishes trust. I've read about dozens of cultures here that have variants of communal dining as peace gestures." Professor Krell studied the human with an expression that might have been respect or academic horror. "You essentially improvised a first contact protocol based on pattern recognition and assumptions about evolutionary psychology." "Well, when you phrase it like that, it sounds unscientific." The human smiled. "But yeah, basically. I tried to think about behaviors that might transcend specific communication systems and appeal to underlying social instincts." "That's not how we teach diplomacy here." "I know. I read your textbooks. Very thorough. Lots of established frameworks." She paused, choosing words carefully. "But frameworks assume you know what category the other species fits into. The Jarvik's briefing didn't give me enough information for that, so I responded to what was happening in real time." "Winging it," Quarles said from his door position. "Adaptive improvisation," the human corrected, though her tone suggested she knew it was the same thing. Vresh pulled up her test results. Perfect score. Faster resolution than 80% of previous attempts. Methodology entirely unique. This approach, reading emotional states, testing hypotheses through behavior, is this standard for humans? Sort of. We call it social intelligence. Reading body language, inferring intent, adjusting behavior based on feedback. Most humans do it unconsciously." "Unconsciously," Ilix repeated. "You're telling me your species performs complex real-time psychological analysis as a default cognitive function?" "I mean, we have to. We don't have telepathy or pheromone communication or universal translators built into our biology. We evolved in social groups where misreading someone's intent could get you killed or exiled. So we got really good at picking up subtle cues. Thelen made a notation on his personal display. The Trell student who attempted greeting you mentioned your emotional spectrum was overwhelming. Something shifted in the human's expression. A microcontraction around her eyes, the translation software flagged as discomfort. Yeah, I heard about that. Is he okay? He's recovering, but it raises questions about human emotional complexity. We feel a lot of things simultaneously, she admitted. Contradictory things sometimes. It's normal for us. We just manage it. How? Ilix asked, genuinely curious. The human considered this. Practice, I guess. We learn as children to identify emotions, process them, decide which ones to act on. It's not always conscious. Sometimes we feel afraid and do the thing anyway. Sometimes we're angry but choose kindness. Our emotions inform decisions but don't control them. That sounds exhausting. It can be, she shrugged, a gesture conveying volumes despite its simplicity. But it also means we're adaptable. We can function in situations that might be overwhelming because we're used to managing internal chaos. Krell deactivated her monitoring screens. The examination is concluded. You passed with distinction, though I'm filing an academic note that your methods deviate significantly from established protocols. Is that bad? To be determined. Krell's mandibles clicked in a pattern that might have been grudging approval. Return to your quarters. We'll inform you of class assignments shortly. After the human left, the faculty remained in the observation deck, processing what they'd witnessed. She succeeded by refusing to follow any established framework, Sinneth said slowly, just reading the situation and responding. Dangerous precedent, Krell muttered. Can't teach that in a classroom. Maybe that's the point, Vresh said quietly. He was thinking about the Founder's seal, the decommissioned AI, the careful orchestration of this human's arrival. Someone wanted them to see what undefined looks like in practice. Why? He didn't answer. Below, in the empty simulation chamber, environmental systems reset to default parameters, erasing all evidence of the most unorthodox first contact in the Institute's history. But the test results remained, archived, undeniable. Success through methods that shouldn't work but somehow did. Just like everything else about humans, the message arrived at 3:47 station time, which meant Dean Vresh was asleep when his personal terminal began emitting the harmonic frequency reserved for communications that could end careers. He rolled out of his rest pod, pulling on formal administrative robes with 3 arms while the 4th accessed the encrypted file. The header made his primary heart stutter. Classification, Observer Council, eyes only. Observer Council, the oldest intelligence network in known space, species so ancient they'd witnessed formation of the current galactic order, who maintained stations in dead zones beyond mapped territory, who very carefully never interfered, except when they did. The message was brief, which somehow made it worse. Ray, Entry Candidate 47J, Earth Origin. Dean Vresh, your inquiry regarding authorization has been noted. Please be advised that Earth's application was sponsored under the Anthropological Observation Protocol, Section 7, Subsection 12. Species of Interest, Developmental Monitoring, approved for limited contact. This sponsorship carries full diplomatic protection under Founders Treaty Article 3. Earth's sentient population has been under observation for approximately 12,000 standard cycles. Recent assessment indicates sufficient technological and social development for controlled introduction to wider galactic community. The Celestial Institute was selected as primary contact point due to your institution's historical commitment, to academic neutrality and species integration. Rejection of this candidate would constitute breach of Observer Council protocols and result in immediate diplomatic review of your institution's charter. The human will remain enrolled. Adapt accordingly. Observer Council, Deep Station Keth 7. Vresh read it 3 times, then once more to confirm he hadn't hallucinated. 12,000 cycles. They'd been watching humanity for 12,000 cycles and only now decided the species was ready for introduction, or interesting enough to study in a controlled environment, which amounted to the same thing from the Observer Council's perspective. His terminal chimed again, Dean's private faculty channel. Professor Thelon's message was characteristically blunt. Did you get the Observer Council notification? Please tell me you got it too, and I'm not having a stress-induced hallucination. 4 more messages arrived in rapid succession. Apparently, the council had sent the memo to everyone involved in the human's case. Nothing like being collectively informed that your institution had just become an experiment site for an ancient intelligence network's pet project. Vresh dressed properly and made his way to his office, unsurprised to find Quarl already there, staring at a holographic display with the particular stillness that indicated his species' version of screaming internally. We're babysitting a test subject for entities older than recorded history, Quarl said without preamble. Apparently. And we can't reject her, transfer her, or even suggest she might be happier elsewhere because that would violate treaties that predate our civilization. That's the situation. Yes. Quarl's crystalline structure refracted light in patterns of pure resignation. I need to update her security clearance. To what? Something that won't trigger alarms when she inevitably does something else that shouldn't be possible. He pulled up Candidate 47J's student file. The species classification still read, undefined. What do I even put here? Vresh considered this. The human had spent 3 days on campus and had already triggered a scanner malfunction, caused a faculty crisis, befriended an empath despite overwhelming him, broken protocol on a standard examination by inventing her own methodology, and somehow succeeded at everything despite operating outside every established framework. Diplomatic wild card, he said finally. That's not a classification. It is now. Vresh accessed his administrative override codes. Create a new category. Species, human, origin, Earth, classification, diplomatic wild card, clearance level, Observer Council protected. That's going to raise questions. Good, let them ask the Observer Council for clarification. Vresh filed the amended record with perhaps more satisfaction than was professionally appropriate. If ancient intelligences want to use our institution for their social experiments, they can handle the paperwork inquiries. Quarl made the changes, his light patterns flickering with something that might have been amusement. Her first scheduled class is in 4 hours, Advanced Intersystem Relations, Professor Krell's course. How is Krell handling this? She requisitioned 3 additional teaching assistants and filed a formal complaint about unprecedented pedagogical challenges. Quarl pulled up security footage from the classroom building. The other students were already arriving early. Word had spread about the examination results. Vresh watched the feed. Students from 24 species clustering in small groups, their body language universally expressing variations on cautious curiosity and mild anxiety. Everyone knew about the human now, the undefined student, the one who didn't fit any category but somehow belonged anyway. Should we brief her, Quarl asked, about the Observer Council? And tell her what? That she's been watched, her entire species development, by entities we barely understand. That her admission here is part of some long-term study we're not privy to the full scope of. Vresh felt tired in a way that transcended physical exhaustion. She applied to study here. She earned her place through examination. Let her be a student. She's more than that now. To us perhaps, to the council. Vresh turned off the security feed. But to herself, she's still just a graduate student who wanted to study diplomatic theory at the best institution in the galaxy. An institution that's now terrified of her. Not terrified, confused. There's a difference. Vresh began drafting the official response to the Observer Council's message, carefully worded acknowledgement that committed to nothing while confirming everything. Confusion is manageable. It's how learning begins. The station's atmospheric systems cycled from night to day mode, artificial sunlight filtering through environmental panels. Across campus, students stirred in their quarters, preparing for another day of classes, research, and the thousand small dramas of academic life. In dormitory Unit 47J, a human brushed her teeth with water she'd had to specially request, because standard solvent dispensers produced fluids that would have dissolved her esophagus. She dressed in modified environmental clothing, packed her study materials, and left for her first official day of classes. She passed 3 Trell students who tensed noticeably at her approach, then relaxed when she smiled and offered a cheerful greeting. A maintenance drone rerouted to avoid her, its processors still recovering from their last interaction. 2 professors altered their walking paths, not from fear exactly, but from the particular weariness academics develop toward phenomena they can't yet explain. Candidate 47J noticed none of this. Or if she did, she'd already categorized it as normal adjustment period behavior and dismissed it as irrelevant to her immediate objectives. She entered Professor Krell's classroom 17 minutes early, selected a seat in the middle section, and began reviewing her notes. The room gradually filled. Students filed in, chose seats, most notably not adjacent to the human, and prepared their recording devices. Professor Krell arrived precisely on time, her mandibles clicking in the specific pattern that signaled the beginning of class. She surveyed the room, her gaze pausing fractionally on the human, then continued as if nothing unusual had occurred. Advanced Intersystem Relations, she announced. The study of how disparate civilizations communicate, cooperate, and coexist despite fundamental differences in biology, psychology, and cultural frameworks. By the end of this course, you will understand the theoretical foundations that prevent galactic society from descending into chaos. She activated the central display, showing a complex web of treaties, protocols, and diplomatic frameworks accumulated over millennia. These systems work because they're built on categorization. We identify species types, communication modalities, psychological profiles. We create frameworks, then apply them consistently. A pause, deliberate. This semester, we have the opportunity to examine what happens when something doesn't fit our categories. Krell's gaze found the human. When confronted with the undefined, we have 2 options: expand our frameworks or acknowledge their limitations. This class will explore both. Around the room, students shifted in their seats. The human simply listened, her expression attentive. Your first assignment, Krell continued, is to partner with someone from a different species and develop a communication protocol that doesn't rely on your primary sensory modality. No telepathy for telepaths. No pheromones for chemical communicators. No translation matrices for technological species. You will find a way to understand each other using methods outside your evolutionary toolkit. She deactivated the display. Choose your partners, begin. The room erupted in motion as students scrambled to pair off. The human remained seated, waiting patiently as others formed groups. Eventually, a young Trell student, not the one from the cafeteria incident, but perhaps related based on morphological similarities, approached cautiously. Would you, the Trell started, then reconsidered phrasing. I Mav want to work together. The human's face performed that complex sequence of muscular contractions that signified genuine pleasure. "I'd love to. She caught herself, probably remembering her student designation. "You can call me Jay." "Jay," Mav repeated, testing the sound. "That's a name, a personal identifier." "Yep, short for, well, my full name is harder to pronounce, but Jay works." She pulled out a notebook, actual paper. "What's your primary communication mode?" "Empathic resonance, supplemented by visual cues." "And mine is verbal supplemented by contextual inference." Jay made a notation. "So we need to communicate without you using empathy and me using verbal language. That's going to be interesting." "Is that a positive assessment?" "Very positive. Interesting usually means I'm about to learn something new." From his office, Vresh watched the security feed of Krell's classroom. The human and the Trell student attempting to bridge a communication gap using methods neither had evolved for. Around them, dozens of other species pairs doing the same thing. The human's file sat open on his display. Species human, classification diplomatic wildcard, status enrolled. And in the notes section recently added, observer council protected, query at own risk. "She has no idea," Quarles said, appearing in the doorway, "that she's part of something bigger than her individual enrollment." "Does it matter?" Vresh asked. "She's here to learn, we're here to teach. The Observer Council's agenda is their own concern. Until it becomes ours. Then we'll adapt." Vresh closed the file. The word undefined disappeared from view but remained in every database, every faculty discussion, every nervous glance from students who couldn't quite categorize their new classmate. It's what academic institutions do. We encounter the unknown and find ways to understand it. Even when the unknown files paperwork and asks for coffee. Especially then. On the security feed, the human and the Trell had apparently achieved some kind of breakthrough, both making gestures that suggested successful communication. Around them, the semester's first lesson was already being learned. Frameworks were useful until they weren't. And sometimes the most important skill was knowing when to ignore the textbook entirely. The scanner had read undefined. The administrators had panicked. The faculty had theorized. And the students had worried. But the human just kept showing up to class, doing the work, making friends with species who should have found her incomprehensible, and succeeding through methods that shouldn't function but somehow did. Perhaps Vresh thought that was the real lesson. Not that humans were exceptional or dangerous or unprecedented, though they might be all three, but that undefined wasn't a problem to be solved. It was simply another variable in an equation the galaxy was still learning to calculate. And somewhere in deep space, on a station so old its construction predated written records, the Observer Council noted the successful integration, updated their files, and continued watching a species that had always been very good at surviving in places that insisted they shouldn't exist. The galaxy would adapt to humans. Eventually. It didn't really have a choice. 3 weeks into the semester, Jay found something she wasn't supposed to find. It started innocently enough. Professor Krell had assigned research papers on historical diplomatic failures, encouraging students to explore the Institute's archives for primary source materials. Jay had always been thorough. Back on Earth, her professors had praised her diligence, sometimes with the tone people use when they actually mean excessive, but are too polite to say it. She'd been searching for records on the Kelvari Accords, a peace treaty that had famously collapsed after 2 decades. The database suggested Archive Section 7 Alpha, subsection 42. The door to that section required 3 different security clearances. Jay had 2 of them, standard student research access and extended privileges granted for her diplomatic theory coursework. The third should have stopped her. Instead, the system paused, scanned her biometric signature, displayed classification, diplomatic wild card in text that flickered uncertainly, then granted access with what could only be described as digital reluctance. The archive section was temperature-controlled, dimly lit, filled with data crystals arranged in geometric patterns that probably made sense to whoever had designed the organizational system a few thousand years ago. Jay found the Kelvari Accords files easily enough. Then she noticed something odd. Adjacent to the Kelvari materials sat another data crystal, filed incorrectly, or perhaps deliberately hidden. The label was partially corrupted, but Jay could make out enough characters to be curious. Observer Council, Restricted, Species Integration Protocols. She hesitated for approximately 3 seconds before her academic curiosity overwhelmed her common sense. The data crystal interfaced with her personal reader, displaying files that made her stomach drop. Species profiles, hundreds of them, thousands maybe, each documenting first contact scenarios, integration timelines, success rates, failure analyses. And there, filed under active observation priority status, was Earth. Jay read her own species file with growing horror. Species human Homo sapiens, planet Earth Sol 3, status pre-contact development phase. Observation duration 11,847 standard cycles. Integration assessment, high risk, high reward profile. Species demonstrates concerning volatility coupled with exceptional adaptive capacity. Recommend controlled introduction to galactic community via academic pathway. Method, single candidate placement at Celestial Institute. Monitor social integration, academic performance, psychological stability under pressure. Assess potential for broader human-galactic relations based on individual case study. Authorization, Observer Council, unanimous approval. Founder's seal granted under Anthropological Observation Protocol. Jay's hands trembled slightly as she scrolled through additional documentation. Test parameters, observation notes, performance metrics analyzing her every action since arriving at the Institute. They'd been watching her entire species for 12,000 years. And she, specifically she, had been sent here as a trial run, a guinea pig, a test case to determine whether humanity was ready for the galaxy or should remain isolated on Earth, blissfully unaware that aliens existed. She found a section labeled Risk Assessment, Extinction Level Scenarios. It contained contingency plans. What the Council would do if humans proved too volatile, too aggressive, too dangerous for galactic society. Quarantine protocols, trade embargoes, defensive measures. One file was labeled simply, Preventive Action. Jay didn't open that one. She didn't need to. She understood exactly what preventive action meant when discussing a species deemed too dangerous to integrate. She disconnected the data crystal with shaking hands, returned it to its misfiled position, and left the archive section on legs that felt less stable than they should. Back in her dormitory, Jay sat on her bed, designed for a species with different physiology, still uncomfortable after 3 weeks, and processed what she'd learned. She was being evaluated, constantly. Every friendship she formed, every class discussion she participated in, every exam she took, it was all data, evidence, proof of concept or failure depending on how she performed. And if she failed, if she proved humanity wasn't ready, the galaxy would close its doors. Earth would be left alone, isolated, perhaps permanently. 12,000 years of observation would conclude with a decision to keep humans contained. Or worse, that preventive action file haunted her. Jay pulled up her personal files, looking at the communication she'd sent home when she first arrived, cheerful messages to her parents, her friends, her old professors. Everyone so proud of her. Earth's first representative to the stars. Except it wasn't pride she should be feeling. It was pressure, The weight of an entire species' future resting on her ability to be likable, competent, stable, to prove that humans deserved a place in galactic society. Her hands were still shaking. She forced herself to breathe slowly, using techniques her mother had taught her when anxiety attacks hit during her undergraduate finals. Identify the emotion, acknowledge it, process it, decide what to do with it. Fear, definitely fear. Also anger, sharp, hot, the kind that made her want to march straight to Dean Vresh's office and demand explanations. But underneath those emotions, something else was emerging. Determination. They wanted to test her, fine, she'd show them what humans could do. They wanted to see if humanity was ready. She'd prove they were, not through aggression or intimidation, but through exactly the approach she'd been using all along. Adaptability, curiosity, the willingness to bridge gaps even when it seemed impossible. Jay opened her course materials for the next day's classes. Professor Thelon's comparative biology lecture, Dr. Sinith's astrophysics seminar, Professor Krell's diplomatic theory session where they'd be discussing multi-party negotiations. She had reading to finish, assignments to complete, study group meetings with Mav and 3 other students who'd gradually warmed to her presence. Normal student things. Except now she understood what was really at stake. She worked through the night, her determination crystallizing into something harder than fear. By the time artificial dawn light filtered through her window, Jay had made a decision. She wouldn't confront the administration, wouldn't demand explanations or challenge the Observer Council's methods. Instead, she'd do exactly what she'd come here to do. Learn everything she could about diplomacy, about different species, about how to build bridges across impossible divides. And she'd succeed so thoroughly that when the council made their final assessment, there would be only one possible conclusion. Humanity was ready. Not because one human could jump through their hoops perfectly, but because humans, messy, volatile, adaptable humans, had something valuable to offer the galaxy. Jay closed her study materials and headed to breakfast, her steps steady now. In his office, Dean Vresh received an automated alert from Archive Security. Access log, Section 7 Alpha, Subsection 42, Candidate 47J duration, 47 minutes. He pulled up the detailed access report, noted which files had been opened, and felt something very much like dread settle into his secondary neural cluster. "Quarrel," he said into his communicator, "we have a situation." "What kind of situation?" "The human just discovered she's being tested." A long pause. "How did she take it?" Vresh checked his security monitors. Jay was in the cafeteria, laughing at something Mav had said, eating breakfast with her study group like it was any normal day. "I honestly have no idea," he admitted, "but I suspect we're about to find out." On his desk, the Observer Council's encrypted communication line remained ominously silent. For now, Professor Krell's advanced negotiation seminar should have been straightforward. 12 students, split into 3 teams, tasked with resolving a simulated trade dispute between fictional species with incompatible resource needs. It was going well until Team 2, Jay's team, proposed a solution that wasn't in the scenario parameters. "We've identified a fundamental flaw in the simulation," Jay explained, standing at the presentation podium with Mav beside her. "The scenario assumes resource scarcity is absolute, but both species have technology capable of synthesis. The conflict exists because neither side considered collaboration as an option." "The simulation doesn't include synthesis technology," Professor Krell said, her mandibles clicking in a pattern that suggested she knew where this was going. "But it should," Jay continued. "In real diplomatic situations, you're not limited to the options presented in the initial briefing. You're supposed to find new options, creative solutions that address underlying needs rather than just negotiating over fixed positions. That's called changing the parameters of the problem. Or solving it, Jay said quietly. The classroom went silent. Professor Krell studied the human with an expression that might have been approval or might have been concern, possibly both. Team 2 receives full marks for creative thinking, Krell announced finally. But I'm adding a note that creative thinking in actual diplomatic situations can have unpredictable consequences. After class, Mav cornered Jay in the hallway. You've been different lately, the Trell said, empathic sensors clearly reading something. More focused, also more. Contained, I think is the word. Your emotional resonance feels compressed like you're holding something back. Jay managed a smile. Just stress, midterms coming up. That's not what I'm sensing. Mav's head tilted in concern. Jay, if something's wrong. I'm fine, Jay interrupted, perhaps too quickly. Really, just adjusting to everything. It's a lot being the only human here. What she didn't say. Being the only human here who knows she's a test case for her entire species. Mav didn't look convinced, but Trell cultural norms apparently prioritized respecting emotional boundaries, so the topic was dropped. Jay made it back to her dormitory before the anxiety attack hit. She sat on the edge of her bed, forcing herself to breathe through it, using every technique she'd learned. But the pressure was building. Every day felt like a performance. Every interaction analyzed not just by her, but by observers she couldn't see, measuring her worthiness to represent humanity. Her personal terminal chimed. A message from her mother back on Earth, cheerful and proud. Everyone here is so excited about your adventures. The whole university is following your progress. You're making history. Jay stared at the message for a long time. History, right. The kind of history that either opened doors for billions of humans or kept them locked permanently. No pressure. She was composing a response when her terminal chimed again. Official institute notification this time. Candidate 47J, mandatory meeting with Dean Vresh. Today, 1600 hours. Attendance required. Jay's stomach nodded. They knew, of course they knew she'd accessed restricted files. Now came the consequences. She arrived at the dean's office exactly on time, finding not just Vresh, but also Quarrel and 3 other administrators she didn't recognize. Please sit. Vresh gestured to a chair that still wasn't designed for human physiology. Jay sat, keeping her posture neutral, her expression calm. Every micro-expression could be analyzed. Every word weighted. 3 weeks ago, Vresh began, you accessed Archive Section 7 Alpha, files you weren't explicitly authorized to view. The system granted me access, Jay said carefully. I assumed my clearance was sufficient. The system, Quarrel said, his crystalline surface flickering, experienced what we're calling a classification error. Your profile designation caused certain security protocols to malfunction. Because I'm undefined, Jay said quietly. Because you're unprecedented, Vresh corrected, and you read files about the Observer Council's monitoring of Earth. No point denying it, Jay nodded. What did you conclude from those files? Jay met his eyes, all 4 of them. That I'm being evaluated. That my performance here determines whether humanity gets invited to the galactic community or stays isolated on Earth. And how does that make you feel? The question surprised her, not what she'd expected from an administrative disciplinary meeting. Honestly, terrified, Jay admitted. Also angry that nobody told me. Also determined to succeed anyway because what other choice do I have? You could file a complaint, one of the other administrators suggested. Violation of informed consent protocols. You were enrolled under false pretenses. Was I? Jay leaned forward slightly. I applied to study here. I'm studying here. Everything else is just context. Context that fundamentally changes your situation. Maybe, But I still came here to learn diplomatic theory. I still want to understand how different species coexist. That hasn't changed." Vresh exchanged glances with the other administrators. Some form of nonverbal communication Jay couldn't quite interpret. "The Observer Council," Vresh said carefully, "has certain protocols. They've been monitoring your progress. Your discovery of their files has complicated matters." "How?" "You're now aware you're being tested, which affects the validity of the test results. Self-awareness of observation parameters changes behavioral patterns." Jay almost laughed. It came out as something closer to a strangled sound. "So what happens now? Do you send me home, erase my memories, decide humanity failed because I was too curious?" "No," Vresh said firmly. "You continue your studies, but you do so with full knowledge of what's at stake." "Why?" "Because," Quarl interjected, "the Observer Council has decided that your awareness of the situation is itself a test parameter. How humans handle pressure, how they perform when they know they're being evaluated." "That's," Jay stopped herself, was going to say cruel, instead said challenging. "Yes," Vresh agreed. "And if it helps, know that we're also being evaluated. The Institute's handling of an undefined species, whether our frameworks are sufficiently flexible to accommodate something unprecedented. So we're all being tested." "Welcome to galactic society," Vresh said dryly. "Everything is always a test." Jay sat back in the uncomfortable chair, processing this. The pressure hadn't lessened. If anything, it had intensified. But there was something almost liberating about having it acknowledged openly. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You may." The file mentioned extinction-level scenarios, contingency plans if humanity proves too dangerous. Vresh was silent for a long moment. "Yes," he said finally, "those protocols exist. They exist for every species under observation." "Has the Council ever implemented them?" "Twice, in recorded history. Both times for species that demonstrated uncontrollable aggression toward other sentient life." "And humanity?" "Is not currently classified as an extinction-level threat. But yes, the potential exists, which is precisely why this evaluation matters." Jay nodded slowly. "Then I'll make sure it matters in the right way." She stood straightening her modified environmental suit. "Is that all, Dean?" "One more thing." Vresh pulled up a holographic display. "Your midterm examinations are scheduled for next week. All faculty members will be evaluating your performance. Additional scrutiny should be expected." "Understood." Jay left the office, her mind already planning study schedules, review sessions, every possible way to excel on exams that were no longer just about grades, but about proving her species' worth. Behind her, the administrators watched her go. "She's handling it better than expected," Quarl observed. "Or she's very good at hiding panic," another administrator suggested. Vresh pulled up Jay's biometric readings from the meeting. Elevated heart rate, increased cortisol, all the physiological markers of stress. But her behavior had remained controlled, professional, determined. "She's adapting," he said quietly, "just like her file predicted humans would." On his desk, the Observer Council's communication line chimed with an incoming message. "Subject remains viable. Continue observation. Increase pressure parameters as scheduled." Vresh stared at the message for a long time before closing it. He'd been an administrator for 700 years. He'd seen countless students succeed and fail. But this was the first time he'd actively hoped a student would pass, not just for their own sake, but for the sake of billions who would never know they were being judged by proxy. In her dormitory, Jay opened her course materials and began studying with focused intensity that bordered on obsessive. Midterms in 1 week. An entire species' future riding on her performance. No pressure. The midterm examination for advanced intersystem relations wasn't just difficult, it was designed to be psychologically brutal. Professor Krell had explained the format with clinical precision. 36 hours, no breaks longer than 6 hours for sleep, a series of escalating scenario simulations that tested not just knowledge but endurance, decision-making under stress, and the ability to maintain ethical standards while exhausted. Most students, Krell had said, experience some form of cognitive breakdown by hour 28. The examination measures how well you function even then. Jay had been functioning at baseline high stress for weeks now. She wasn't sure what breakdown would even look like anymore. The first 12 hours went well enough. Standard diplomatic scenarios, trade negotiations, cultural misunderstandings, resource allocation disputes. Jay handled them with the methodical approach she developed over the semester, drawing on her growing understanding of different species' communication styles and psychological frameworks. Hour 14 introduced active hostile engagement, a simulation where a territorial species was actively threatening violence. Jay managed de-escalation through careful positioning and non-verbal communication. Success. Hour 19 added time pressure, multiple crises simultaneously. Jay prioritized, delegated to simulated junior diplomats, made decisions without complete information. Acceptable outcomes. Hour 23 removed translation support. Jay had to navigate a complex negotiation using only visual cues and behavioral analysis. She drew on her human social intelligence, reading body language patterns, inferring intent from microexpressions in species she'd only studied theoretically. It worked mostly. Hour 27 was when everything changed. The scenario loaded like all the others, a diplomatic crisis requiring resolution. But this one was different. Jay recognized it immediately from her unauthorized reading in the archives. It was the Calvary Accords scenario, the one that had actually happened, the peace treaty that had failed catastrophically, leading to decades of conflict and millions of casualties. And the simulation was asking her to prevent it. Jay stared at the scenario parameters with growing horror. This wasn't just a test of diplomatic skill. This was the Observer Council asking, can humans do better than species with centuries more experience? Can they prevent the disasters we've witnessed throughout galactic history? Are they worth integrating? Or are they just another volatile species that will cause more harm than good? Something inside Jay cracked. Not dramatically, not obviously, but she felt it, the careful containment she'd maintained for weeks fracturing under the weight of impossible expectations. She stood abruptly from the examination station, her legs shaky from hours of sitting. Candidate 47J, the automated proctor system said, you have not completed scenario 23. Leaving the examination area constitutes forfeiture. I know, Jay said. She walked to the exit. The door was locked. Examination protocols require. Override, Jay interrupted. Student welfare emergency. I need to leave, now. A pause while the system processed this unprecedented request. Processing, please remain. Now, Jay repeated, her voice harder than she'd intended. Or I start damaging equipment until someone comes to let me out manually. The threat was empty, mostly, but her tone must have triggered some algorithmic threshold because the door unlocked with a soft click. Jay emerged into the corridor outside the examination hall. Artificial night cycle lighting gave everything a blue-gray cast. The campus was quiet. She walked without direction, her body operating on autopilot while her mind spiraled through everything that had accumulated over the past weeks. The weight of representing an entire species. The knowledge that failure meant not just personal disappointment, but potentially catastrophic consequences for humanity. The Observer Council's clinical evaluation of her every action. The impossible standard of proving humans deserved a place in a galaxy that seemed to function perfectly well without them. Jay found herself in the campus garden, a biodome containing plant life from a dozen different worlds. She sat on a bench designed for a species with different proportions and let herself feel everything she'd been suppressing. Fear, anger, exhaustion, loneliness. The desperate, overwhelming pressure of carrying expectations she'd never agreed to shoulder. She didn't cry. Her physiology was dehydrated from hours in the examination hall, her tear ducts too dry. But she felt like crying, felt like screaming, felt like giving up entirely. "You left the examination." Jay looked up. Professor Krell stood at the biodome entrance, her mandibles still in neutral position. "Yes. You understand the consequences." "I don't care," Jay said, and realized it was true. "I don't care about the examination. I don't care about the Observer Council's evaluation. I don't care about any of it anymore." Krell approached slowly, her multiple legs moving in careful, non-threatening rhythm. She sat on an adjacent bench, or rather, arranged her body in a sitting equivalent posture. "Tell me why." "Because it's impossible," Jay said, the words coming faster now, weeks of containment breaking. "You're asking me to be perfect, to represent an entire species I don't speak for, to prove that billions of humans I've never met deserve acceptance from a galactic community they don't even know exists, and I can't do it. I'm just one person. I'm tired and stressed, and I make mistakes, and I'm not enough." "No," Krell agreed, "you're not." The blunt acknowledgement was somehow worse than false reassurance. "Then why put me through this? Why make me think I had a chance?" "Because," Krell said carefully, "the test was never about perfection. It was about seeing what happens when humans face impossible pressure." "I'm failing." "Are you?" Krell's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "You recognized an impossible standard. You acknowledged your limitations. You prioritized your welfare over completion of an arbitrary task. These are not failures. These are sophisticated cognitive functions that many species lack." "I walked out of my midterm examination." "You recognized when continuing would cause more harm than good. Do you know how many diplomats throughout galactic history failed to make that recognition? How many pushed themselves past breaking points and made catastrophic decisions as a result?" Jay looked up. "Is this part of the test too?" "Everything is part of the test," Krell said, "but that doesn't make it less real. You're genuinely exhausted, genuinely overwhelmed. The question isn't whether you experience these states, it's how you handle them." "By walking away." "Sometimes, yes." Krell adjusted her position slightly. "The Kelvari Accords failed because the lead diplomat refused to acknowledge they'd reached their cognitive limits. They pushed through exhaustion, made poor decisions, and the resulting treaty contained fatal flaws that became apparent only later. Walking away would have been the better choice." Jay processed this, "So I passed by failing." "You demonstrated wisdom by recognizing your limitations. Whether that constitutes passing or failing depends on what you do next." "I don't know what to do next." "Then rest," Krell said simply. "The examination allows 6-hour sleep intervals for a reason. Take one. Return when you're capable of functioning. Complete what you can, accept what you cannot." "And if that's not enough? If the Observer Council decides humanity isn't ready because I couldn't handle their impossible scenarios?" Krell's mandibles performed a complex gesture Jay had learned meant deep consideration. "Then perhaps," Krell said slowly, "the Observer Council's evaluation methods need revision. Perhaps a species' worth shouldn't be judged by one individual's performance under artificially extreme conditions." "You can't say that. You're part of the evaluation." "I'm also an educator who's been teaching for 4 centuries. I know the difference between useful assessment and arbitrary cruelty." Krell stood. "Go to your dormitory, sleep, eat, care for yourself. These are not luxuries, they're requirements for cognitive function. Will they let me continue the examination? I'll make certain of it, though you may face penalties for the interruption. I can live with penalties, Jay said quietly. I can't live with pretending I'm something I'm not. Then you've learned the most important lesson in diplomacy, Krell said. Authenticity under pressure matters more than perfect performance. After Krell left, Jay sat in the garden for another hour, watching alien plants photosynthesize under artificial lights. Slowly the panic receded. The pressure didn't disappear. It never would, not while she remained under the Observer Council's scrutiny. But it felt more manageable now. Less like drowning, more like swimming with a heavy weight. She could do this. Not perfectly, not without mistakes or moments of weakness. But she could do it authentically, as herself, representing not an idealized vision of humanity but the messy, imperfect reality. And if that wasn't enough for the council, then maybe they needed to reconsider their standards. Jay stood, her legs steadier now, and headed back to her dormitory. Tomorrow she'd return to the examination. Tonight she'd rest. In his office, Dean Vresh reviewed the examination interruption report with something resembling relief. She walked out, Quarles said, his tone difficult to interpret. She walked out, Vresh agreed, recognized her limits, prioritized her welfare, made a mature decision under extreme pressure. The Observer Council will want analysis. Then they'll get it, along with my professional opinion that their examination parameters were excessive and potentially harmful. Quarles' crystalline structure flickered with surprise. You're criticizing the council. I'm providing honest assessment. That's what they're paying for. Vresh closed the report. If they wanted false compliance, they should have hired different evaluators. On the encrypted communication line, a message waited from the Observer Council. Vresh didn't open it immediately. Let them wait, let them wonder. Sometimes the most important diplomatic skill was knowing when to ignore pressure and act according to your own judgment. The human had just demonstrated that beautifully. Perhaps she was teaching them as much as they were testing her. Jay completed the remaining examination scenarios over the next 15 hours. Not perfectly. She still failed several simulations, made decisions she second-guessed, struggled with scenarios designed to be unsolvable. But she completed them authentically, applying what she'd learned while acknowledging her limitations. When the examination finally ended, she slept for 14 hours straight. She woke to find her personal terminal flooded with messages, faculty notifications, administrative updates, and one message from an unknown sender with encryption protocols she'd never seen before. The Observer Council. Jay almost deleted it, almost decided that whatever they had to say could wait until she'd had breakfast and felt like a functional human being. Instead, she opened it. Candidate 47J. Your performance during the midterm examination period has been thoroughly analyzed. Results have been compiled and forwarded to relevant authorities within the Celestial Institute and the broader galactic community. Your evaluation is complete. You are hereby summoned to appear before a council tribunal to receive final assessment and determination regarding Earth's status within galactic society. Attendance is mandatory. Location and temporal coordinates are attached. Travel arrangements have been made. Jay read the message 3 times, her stomach knotting tighter with each pass. This was it, the final judgment, not just of her but of her entire species. And she had to face it in front of a tribunal of ancient intelligences who'd been watching humanity for 12,000 years. The tribunal was held in a chamber deep within the Institute's oldest section, architecture so ancient it predated most modern species' recorded history. The walls were made of something that wasn't quite stone, wasn't quite metal, shifting subtly in ways that hurt to look at directly. 12 representatives sat in a semicircle, Not all were physical forms. Some appeared as energy patterns, others as holographic projections from locations Jay couldn't even guess at. Dean Vresh was there, along with Professor Krell, Quarl, and several other faculty members Jay recognized. They sat in a separate section, observers rather than judges. Jay stood in the center of the chamber, alone. One of the council representatives spoke, Jay's translation implant rendering the communication as a calm, gender-neutral voice that somehow conveyed immense age. Candidate 47J, designated human representative, you have completed your evaluation period. We will now review findings and render judgment. Jay forced herself to stand straight. Before you do, I need to say something. A ripple of what might have been surprise moved through the chamber. Proceed. I understand why you've been watching Earth, why you wanted to test humanity before introducing us to galactic society. We're volatile. We have a history of violence and tribalism. We're probably terrifying to species who have had millennia to develop stable civilizations. She took a breath. But you made a mistake in your methodology. You evaluated me, one human, under artificial conditions, expecting my performance to represent billions of individuals across dozens of cultures and belief systems. That's not how humans work. We're individuals first, always. Our strength comes from diversity, from disagreement, from the chaos of millions of different perspectives trying to find common ground. You suggest our evaluation is invalid, the voice asked. I suggest it's incomplete, Jay corrected. You wanted to know if humans can function in galactic society. I've shown that I can, but that doesn't tell you what humanity as a whole will do. It can't. No single human could demonstrate that. Then how would you propose we evaluate your species? Contact us openly. Let humans meet aliens as themselves, not as test subjects. Give us information, opportunities, and watch what we do with them. Judge us by our collective choices, not by whether one graduate student could handle impossible scenarios designed to break her. Another ripple through the chamber, this one felt different, more like approval. A different council representative spoke, this one's voice carrying harmonics that suggested vast distance. You walked out of your examination. You acknowledged defeat. I acknowledged my limits, Jay said. There's a difference. I failed some scenarios because they were designed to be failures. Because in real life, sometimes there is no good answer. Sometimes the best you can do is recognize that, accept it, and try to minimize harm rather than chasing impossible perfect solutions. Interesting perspective, the first voice said. Do you believe your species is ready for galactic integration? Honestly, I don't know. Jay met where she thought the speaker's eyes would be if they had eyes. I think we have things to offer, adaptability, creativity, different ways of thinking about problems. But we also have flaws. We're impulsive. We form bonds too quickly and make enemies too easily. We haven't solved our own internal conflicts yet. Most species haven't, a third voice interjected. Internal conflict is a feature of sentient existence, not a bug to be resolved before advancement. Then yes, Jay said. If the standard is perfection, we're not ready. If the standard is being interesting, valuable, and capable of growth, then maybe we are. The council members conferred among themselves, communication happening at frequencies and through methods Jay couldn't perceive. The conversation seemed to last hours, though her chronometer indicated only minutes passing. Finally, the first voice spoke again. We have reviewed your performance, considered your statements, and evaluated Earth's developmental trajectory. Our determination is as follows. Jay's heart hammered against her ribs. Humanity is approved for limited integration into galactic society. Formal diplomatic contact will be established with Earth governments within 2 standard cycles. Trade and cultural exchange programs will be initiated under supervision. Full council membership will be considered pending successful integration phase. Jay felt her legs go weak. "You're approving us." "With conditions," the voice continued. "Earth will be monitored during integration. Restrictions will apply to certain technologies and information access. Human expansion into contested space will be regulated. But yes, your species is deemed sufficiently developed for cautious introduction to the broader galactic community." "Why?" Jay asked. "I failed half your scenarios. I walked out of an examination. I'm not exactly a perfect representative." "Precisely," a different voice said, this one carrying what sounded like amusement. "Perfection would have concerned us. It would have suggested either deception or a species so rigid they couldn't adapt to novel situations. You demonstrated precisely what we hoped to see: resilience under pressure, willingness to acknowledge limitations, creative problem-solving combined with ethical consideration, and the courage to challenge authority when you believed standards were unjust." "You showed us," the first voice added, "not what humans pretend to be, but what they actually are. Messy, contradictory, adaptable, and fundamentally committed to survival and growth despite overwhelming odds." "The galaxy," another voice said, "has plenty of species who excel at following established frameworks. We don't need more of those. What we need, what we always need, are species who can create new frameworks when old ones fail." Jay didn't know what to say. Weeks of pressure, fear, and impossible expectations suddenly lifting, leaving her feeling unmoored. "Thank you," she managed finally. "Don't thank us yet," the first voice said, carrying notes that might have been warning or might have been dark humor. "Integration is often more challenging than isolation. Your species is about to discover they're not alone in the universe. That knowledge will transform everything, sometimes in difficult ways." "We'll adapt," Jay said with more confidence than she felt. "It's what we do." "Indeed, that will be all, Candidate 47J. You may return to your studies. Your academic status is unchanged. You remain enrolled as a standard student. The examination incident has been noted as a passing grade with commendation for practical wisdom." Jay bowed, unsure if it was appropriate but needing to acknowledge the moment somehow, and turned to leave. "One more thing," the first voice called. "What will you tell your people when they learn the truth, that they were tested, evaluated like laboratory subjects?" Jay paused at the chamber entrance, considering the question carefully. "I'll tell them we were noticed," she said finally, "that we mattered enough to be evaluated, that we passed not by being perfect but by being ourselves, and that the galaxy decided we were interesting enough to take a chance on." "Truth softened by perspective," the voice observed. "Well answered." Jay left the chamber, her legs carrying her automatically toward the Institute's central plaza. She emerged into bright artificial sunlight, students moving between classes, the normal rhythm of academic life continuing as it always had. Except everything had changed. In 2 cycles, less than a standard year, Earth would receive official contact. Humanity would learn they weren't alone. Her world would transform in ways she could barely imagine. And it had happened at least partially because she'd been willing to try, to fail, to acknowledge imperfection while refusing to give up. She pulled out her personal terminal and composed a message to her mother. "Something big is coming. I can't explain yet, official protocols and all that. But I want you to know that everything we talked about when I left, about representing humanity well, about making Earth proud, it mattered. And I hope I did okay. I love you, talk soon, really soon." She sent the message, knowing it would be weeks before it reached Earth through the communication networks, knowing her mother would read between the lines and understand that something significant had happened. "Congratulations." Jay turned. Professor Krell stood behind her, mandibles arranged in what Jay had learned to recognize as approval. "You heard." Faculty observers were present. "The council's verdict will be announced formally tomorrow, but yes, I heard. Krell moved to stand beside Jay, both of them looking out over the campus. "How do you feel?" "Terrified," Jay admitted. "Also relieved. Also like I might need to sleep for another 14 hours. All reasonable responses. Krell's mandibles clicked softly. "For what it's worth, I believed you'd succeed. Your species has survived countless challenges. This was simply one more. The hard part starts now, doesn't it? Actually integrating, living up to the Council's decision." "Yes," Krell agreed. "But you won't be doing it alone. Your people will face it together with all your messy, chaotic, contradictory brilliance." Jay smiled, genuine this time, not performative. "Professor Krell, did you just compliment humanity?" "I stated observable facts," Krell said primly, but her mandibles were still arranged in approval. That evening, Jay met with her study group, Mav, and 3 other students who'd gradually become something like friends over the semester. "You look different," Mav observed, empathic sensors clearly reading something. "Lighter somehow." "Long story," Jay said. "Most of it I still can't talk about, but the short version is that things went better than I thought they would. Your midterm results, among other things." They studied together, working through upcoming assignments, and for the first time in weeks, Jay felt like she could breathe. The pressure hadn't entirely disappeared. She was still Earth's first representative, still under observation, still responsible in ways that felt too large for one person. But she wasn't alone. She had classmates who'd become friends, professors who believed in her potential, an entire galaxy that had looked at humanity's chaos and decided it was worth taking a chance on. Later that night, alone in her dormitory, Jay stood at her window looking up at artificial stars that represented real suns where real civilizations existed. Thinking about Earth, where billions of humans were going about their lives with no idea that everything was about to change. She thought about her species' history, the wars, the struggles, the countless times humans had faced extinction and survived anyway. The adaptability, the stubborn refusal to accept impossible odds, the capacity to form connections across impossible divides. They weren't perfect, they'd never be perfect. But they were ready. Or ready enough, which was all anyone could ever really be. Jay pulled out her journal, actual paper and pen, because some habits died hard, and began writing, recording everything that had happened, everything she'd learned, everything she hoped Earth would become. Future historians would want this information. Future generations would need to understand how humanity took its first steps into galactic society. But more importantly, Jay needed to remember, needed to preserve the moment when one human, imperfect and overwhelmed, had stood before ancient powers and said, "We're not perfect, but we're worth knowing." And they'd believed her. Outside her window, the artificial stars shone steadily, representing countless worlds where countless species lived, worked, struggled, and thrived. Soon, humanity would join them. The galaxy had survived worse surprises. And humans, messy, volatile, adaptable humans, would figure it out. They always did. And